Welcome to this tutorial video for the Indigenous Navigators Climate Change module. This video provides an introduction to climate change. This video provides an overview of what is climate change, the causes of climate change, the impacts of climate change, and some of the main strategies for addressing climate change. We will start by looking at what is climate change. The term climate refers to the typical weather conditions in a particular region over a long period of time. Climate change therefore refers to long-term changes in temperature and weather. This can happen naturally, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main cause. This chart provides an overview of average global temperatures since 1850. You can see on the right-hand side of the chart that since 1850, each of the last 4 decades has been warmer than any previous decade, with the average temperature of the Earth's surface now 1.3 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. A temperature goal. The consequences of climate change are already being experienced and include extreme weather events, intense droughts, water scarcity, severe fires, rising sea levels, flooding, melting polar ice, catastrophic storms, and declining biodiversity. Scientists agree that limiting the rise of global temperatures to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius will help us avoid the worst climate impacts and maintain a climate where we can live. This target of 1.5 degrees Celsius is now part of the international legal framework that has been developed regarding climate change. The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty with the goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while pursuing active efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. This temperature goal is also being referred to in human rights court cases as an obligation of states to work towards. For example, in March 2024, the European Court for Human Rights found that the Swiss government's climate change mitigation targets and implementation measures were insufficient, as the government was unable to prove that the measures align with the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. However, policies in place around the world currently indicate that there will still be a 3-degree temperature rise by the end of this century. This means that the impacts of climate change will continue to be felt, and that there is a lot more to be done to mitigate these impacts. Forms of environmental harm. It's important to understand that climate change is just one type of harm that can occur in the natural environment. People often misunderstand climate change and assume that it encompasses all harm to the natural environment. To understand the challenges facing the environment today, some people refer to the 3 different elements of the triple planetary crisis. This is also the language that is used by the United Nations. These 3 issues are separate but also closely linked. They can have serious effects on the environment in different ways. Climate change is just one part of this. Pollution refers to the pollution of the natural environment, including the air, fresh water, sea, and land. This occurs when harmful substances are released into the environment, causing damage to living organisms and ecosystems. For example, emissions from vehicles, smoke from industry or from wildfires can pollute the air, or industrial waste, oil spills, or ash from volcanic eruptions can pollute water sources. Biodiversity loss refers to the decline or disappearance of biological diversity. This includes animals, plants, and ecosystems. For example, overfishing can result in a sharp decline in fish populations. Invasive species can lead to the reduction or extinction of native animals, or warming ocean temperatures result in coral bleaching events and can kill large portions of coral. Issues of pollution and biodiversity loss can be caused or exacerbated by climate change, but are not necessarily directly linked or related to climate change. There are therefore instances of severe environmental harm that may be naturally occurring or caused by humans, but are not impacts of climate change. While environmental issues like pollution and biodiversity loss are important, this survey module only collects data on issues directly related to climate change and not on all forms of environmental harm. We will now look at what causes climate change. Human activity causing climate change. Since the 1800s, human activities like burning coal, oil, and gas have been the main cause of climate change. Burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases which trap heat and make the Earth warmer. The main greenhouse gases released by human activities are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases that are gases used for cooling and refrigeration. The greenhouse effect. Like you can see in this diagram, these gases act like a blanket around the Earth. They let sunlight in, but prevent some heat from escaping. This is why they're called greenhouse gases, as the process is similar to how a garden greenhouse works. As you can see on the left-hand side of the diagram, this is a naturally occurring process that keeps the Earth warm enough to support life. However, on the right-hand side of the diagram, you can see that due to human activity, there is a higher concentration of greenhouse gases, which means that less heat escapes. This leads to a warming of the planet that is not natural and leads to climate change. The major sources of these gases from human activity include energy, industry, transport, which includes transport of people, goods, and services using fossil fuels, buildings, agriculture, which includes industrial meat production or livestock use, and land use. This graph shows that there are a lot of different activities that lead to greenhouse gas emissions. However, globally, the energy sector, which is seen in red, is by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. This involves activities like burning coal, oil, and natural gas or fossil fuels to create electricity, heating, and transportation. We are now going to look at the impacts of climate change. This is important as it can sometimes be hard to tell if an impact on the environment is caused by climate change or something else. While the impacts of other environmental harms are important, for the Indigenous Navigated Climate Change module, only climate change impacts are considered. Climate change has consequences for nature and people. Climate change-induced extreme weather events or increased levels of carbon dioxide changes the world around us. This leads to changes to flora, which includes vegetation and plants, fauna, which includes animal life such as fish stocks, and land and marine ecosystems. This also impacts on people, industry, and economies. Other impacts include extreme weather, including heavy rains or floods, droughts or water scarcity, heat waves, stronger storms, and increased wildfire conditions. Melting glaciers and ice leading to rising water or sea levels, causing floods in coastal and other low-lying areas. And more carbon dioxide making oceans more acidic, harming marine life. These impacts then have further effects for nature and people, such as increased occurrences of heat-related illnesses, diseases, and mental health challenges, or loss of biodiversity and reduced food production. Identifying impacts of climate change. As mentioned, climate change is closely related to other types of environmental harm, such as biodiversity loss and pollution. This can mean that it can be challenging to tell the difference between something that is being caused or exacerbated by climate change and something that is a natural occurrence or caused by another kind of environmental harm. Sometimes there is not enough information to be certain if something is caused by climate change or not. An example of a natural occurrence of environmental harm includes a volcanic eruption, which can result in lava flows and ash deposits. This can destroy forests, rivers, and habitats and cause significant environmental harm. However, it is not an impact of climate change. An example of another type of environmental harm includes the release of toxic substances into water sources used by an Indigenous community. Even though this is a severe environmental harm and affects the rights of these people, it is not an impact of climate change. In some areas, periods of extreme weather, drought, or food scarcity may be the result of natural progression of seasons. For example, cyclone seasons or regenerative wildfires. This may mean that while they can have negative impacts on the environment, people, or industry, it is not only a result of climate change. However, often these natural occurrences are exacerbated and made more severe by climate change, significantly increasing the damage they cause. This means that this data may be relevant to the Indigenous Navigated Climate Change module. In the Indigenous Navigated Climate Change module, data collectors may need to decide themselves whether something is likely an impact of climate change and what data is relevant to include or not. If you are collecting data in your community and you notice changes in seasonal weather patterns and the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, then this is likely attributable to climate change. When understanding climate change, it's important to also understand ways that people are managing and addressing climate change and its impacts. Addressing climate change. There are two main strategies for addressing climate change: mitigation and adaptation. Both mitigation and adaptation activities are important. Mitigation involves reducing or preventing greenhouse gas emissions to limit further harm from climate change. For example, by reducing or stopping the use of fossil fuels and transitioning to renewable energy. Adaptation involves activities that strengthen resilience against current or expected impacts of climate change to reduce and prevent further harm. For example, developing community emergency response plans and building infrastructure that can withstand extreme climate events. Both mitigation and adaptation strategies are important for every country to consider. However, mitigation strategies are particularly relevant for countries that are historically or currently responsible for emitting large amounts of greenhouse gases. For example, so-called developed countries. Additionally, adaptation strategies are particularly urgent for countries and areas that already experience severe impacts of climate change. Unfortunately, these are often countries and communities that have contributed the least to the causes of climate change and also have fewer resources to adapt to its impact. This often includes so-called developing countries. This includes Indigenous peoples who may live closely with and be culturally connected to land and marine ecosystems.